Hey, and welcome to this episode of Perspectives. I am your host, Remy Sharon Pearson. Today, we are joined by a dear friend. He is a phenomenal human being. We had a couple of our team listening to the interview as we were doing, and afterwards, they were the most enthusiastic they've been of any guest. They said that was just mind-blowing. And there are so many things I love about this guest. His name is Dr. Srini Pillay. We met about 8 years ago in San Diego, I think. And we're out to dinner. There's a whole group of us, about 30 people. And there was just this wonderful connection because his mind is so completely divinely delicious. He thinks in very unique ways. He's one of the most intelligent people there is. He is playful, he is open, he explores, he's aware of his shadow side, he has great self-awareness. He indulges himself in what he finds joyful, both internally through meditation and in the real world. And you'll hear about it in the interview. And I'm going to try to do him justice in this introduction. So if you haven't heard of Dr. Srini Pillay, he's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist and brain researcher. He's a think tank member for McKinsey & Co. He's CEO of Neurobusiness Group. He's been voted one of the top 20 movers and shakers in leadership development on the planet. He's a well-renowned keynote speaker and lecturer, author, consultant. He completed his residency in psychiatry at McLean Hospital, Harvard's largest freestanding psychiatric hospital. He received the most accolades ever given to a single resident as he completed his residency there. He is very well known for combining head and heart in an approach to personal development and goal mastery. He's formerly served as assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's director of the outpatient exam. This is an introduction this is not just the things he's done in his lifetime. These are a lot of the things he's doing now. He's director of Outpatient Anxiety Disorders Program at McLean, director of the Panic Disorders Research Program in the Brain Imaging Center, 17 years studying functional brain imaging, a member of the by invitation only group for advancement of psychiatry, also a member of Disasters and World Committee. He is developing a model on mindset shifts for burnout. He received an award for Books for a Better Life for his book, Life Unlocked, 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcome Fear, which was published in 2010. When the UN, World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund seek to empower their leaders, they call Srini. He speaks and teaches throughout the world. He teaches in executive education at Harvard Business School and at Duke. He's the author of 6 best-selling books. His latest book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, Unlock the Power of the Unfocused Mind, is available now. I just love that book, and it really does share with you intimately how this man thinks. He's also the CEO and founder of 2 companies. One of them is Relay, which we didn't get to speak about in this interview. Hopefully we've just chatted afterwards. We'll hopefully be able to do a part 2 for you, so you can learn about how he assists people to become their best selves through consciousness and through some virtual reality techniques. And without further ado, it is such an honor and my pleasure to present to you and to share with you this beautiful human being, Dr. Srini Pillay. So share with us, what have you been working on? What are you doing? Tell me what's going on for you.
So I now describe myself as being at the nexus of science, art, and technology. So with my background in psychiatry and brain science, I still have a psychiatry practice and an executive coaching practice. And I do leadership development work with people throughout the world, helping them build resilience or anti-fragility or learn how to be agile or innovative. And I also work in biotechnology, which is the science part of my life. The arts part of my life is I finished writing my musical and I'm currently orchestrating it. And I'm
Wow.
also developing a museum idea with a group of people that's connected to fashion and also not connected to fashion. And I've co-founded 2 technology companies. One is a virtual reality artificial intelligence platform, which is essentially on the surface, we've designed experiences to reduce stress and anxiety but it's a really beautiful place for me to bring all of my interests together because
Mm.
what we're actually doing is because we know that stress and anxiety can lock genes. We also know that when it locks these genes, it opens up pathways to cancer, heart disease, stroke, and neurodegenerative disease. Our long term goal is actually to be able to prolong life in by 50 years, in 5 years, and to try to do this by creating a pattern of what we call gene care. In the same way that we brush our teeth twice a day to prevent dental caries, why don't we proactively take care of the stress that locks these genes that opens up these pathways? And on the surface, it might sound really ambitious to think about prolonging life in that way, but if you think about it, in 1900, the average lifespan was 34 years old. So in
Wow.
100 years, we've more than two and a half times. We're living more than two and a half times longer. So that's a very exciting platform for me because we're looking at artificial intelligence. I get to think about design and indulge the artistic side of me, and then think about hardcore medicine and think about genes and hormones and the rest of the body, and think about mental health and my background there. So that's a fun project, and I've also co-founded a company called Circa, which is a company that reduces stress and anxiety using cognitive techniques. So, and aside from that, I still enjoy playing and I still enjoy eating out, and I
Yeah.
love tennis. So, I'm having a fun. I'm actually moving to New York, so I'm having a fun
Are you
time.
really?
Yeah, I'm in New York right now. So I've
Are
been
you
living.
really?
Yeah. So it's just a lot of fun and a lot of change at a time when there's already change happening in the world.
Yeah. So for our viewers, Srini, we met 8, 9 years ago,
That's right.
I think.
I'm I'm temporally completely disoriented. I'm not even sure
I
what time.
realize
Yeah.
I'll take care of this. How do I describe this man to our viewers so they understand the importance of tuning into you? I was trying to figure out, Srini, how to describe you, and immediately I run into the obvious problems describing a man like you. You are the reason I was so attracted to you when we first met all those years ago. One of the many reasons. You are completely fearless and unself-conscious when it comes to exploring ideas about yourself, about others, about the world. You are fearless isn't even a word. Saying fearless detracts from who you are because that doesn't even register with you. Your ability to conceive of ideas you've never thought of before is instantaneous. There is no gap between the possibility of you being wrong and considering a new idea or seeing things differently. And you bring the most extraordinary playfulness to it. In a way, I thought I was good at playfulness, and then I met Srini Pillai, and it was just a whole other benchmark.
Well, I like to think of I sort of can't help my relentless curiosity. I don't know that it's actually effortful. It's mostly that I'm genuinely mostly in a state of confusion about pretty much everything in the world. So when people are very like, they're like, I know what I am, and
Yeah.
I was invited recently to be on the board of this company that is involved in ethical leadership, and I resisted for so long because I was like, I'm not ethical. I'm very confused about a lot of things, and they were like, "What do you mean you're not ethical?" I said, "Well, I'm just not as certain as you are about the positions you take."
Yeah.
And I gave an example of this to someone the other day when they talked to me. They said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, on the surface, I am not in favor of war. I am not in favor of randomly killing animals. I'm not in favor of killing trees for nothing. But, I live in a nice apartment in New York City. There's no way apartment would be here
Mm.
without wars, without killing animals, without killing trees. So what should I do? Just forget that and then take an ethical position? Should I grapple with that? I just never want to declare myself as having no shadows because I feel like I know deeply the kinds of shadows that I have. And
That's
so,
it.
yeah, so I feel like that's the way I go out in the world. I don't go out with a position. I'm most interested in loving people, and I love being loved. And I think when we can separate that process, so it's not some kind of give and take, but just a celebration of life, that's when I'm most happy.
And that's where you stay. It's wonderful. That's an important point. One of the things I've modeled from you since we first met all those years ago that I keep within me is embracing the shadow side and being very, very humble about what I think I know and being way less certain about right and wrong and literally abandoning right and wrong and abandoning good and bad. I can't use those terms in my personal life or my professional life at all. And I had that before I met you, but you had just taken it way past any line I'd conceived of. And I know it's effortless for you. That's who you are. It's a trait. It's not something you're maintaining. You're not thinking about, I should look at the gray. You embrace the gray. You embrace ambiguity. You prefer not knowing. You are only delighted when there are shades to explore. If it's already decided, you're very bored quickly and you're gone. There's nothing there for you to explore.
Yeah, because I mean, I find the thing we call. I just wrote a piece recently with Deepak Chopra actually on naive realism, and this was on the idea that it's difficult to make decisions based on reality because reality is largely informed by
Yes.
our perceptions, and our perceptions are very limited filters of what's actually going on. For example, just in a very literal way, I cannot hear a dog whistle, but a dog can hear it. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean it doesn't exist because I can't hear it. I might be in a desert and see a mirage. And if I see a mirage, it doesn't mean it exists just because it looks convincing. And there are many, many examples where what we call reality is a representation of something. And so I feel like my reasons for doubting is that my initial filter in the world is perception. And my initial way of interacting with the world is through perception. And I don't trust perception fully for the reasons that I just mentioned. I think there are lots of rational reasons. So if that's the case, I feel like the only thing I can do is ask questions moving forward. And when I interact with people, really encourage them to ask questions as well, so that we can do whatever we're here on earth to do. Some people feel like they know what that is. I feel like I'm always discovering what that is,
Yes.
and knowing it's too stagnant. There's something about I have a very basic philosophy in life, which is you live, you die, you do something in between, who knows what happens after. And
Yeah.
so, I think we try to live richly in this
Mhm.
life. And I think we have hypotheses about, how we want to get older and how, what happens after. But really, every time I have some kind of doubt or worry, and I have doubts and worries too, I always feel like it's an insult to my knowledge that there is something greater in the world that I have faith in, and that worry is really a slap in the face of faith. Uh,
And what is that faith to you?
I believe. So one of the provocative things I like to say is that I believe in God. It's odd for a neuroscientist to say that generally,
Mm.
and I don't know what God is. But I feel like there is I feel like the knowledge of a God, if I had to sort of frame this in the same way that it's framed in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, is that it comes through scriptural testimony, which is the lowest form of knowledge, then inference, which is I had an amazing experience, so I feel like there's something bigger than me, and direct perception, like the transitions in consciousness one experiences during meditation where one feels connected to the soul. And some people speak about that through psychedelic experiences.
Mm.
So I feel that I am convinced that there are forces, that there is a consciousness outside of the human brain that is influential in our day-to-day activities. And it's really not what I'm saying right now is not that controversial. There's a theory called integrated information theory. There are a group of scientists I spoke to in Germany recently who are able to quantify consciousness through the unit phi, phi, and they are discovering that consciousness exists everywhere. And it's so to me, there's so much that's not discovered. Like I've studied the human brain, I've studied the human body, but I have not studied how healing can occur by connecting with these different frequencies. We know very little about this. For example, there are frequencies associated with
Can I just
love.
pause you there, Srini, and just back you up? So you call God what I call consciousness. Do you believe in a personal God? In which case I'm going to challenge you. Or do you believe in a God consciousness, which I experience when I do profound meditation, where there is the no thing and my ego disappears.
Sure.
I'm all good up till there. And then I'm like, hang on, where did you just go? So can you explain how you see those being different if they are?
Yeah, so I mean, so people have all kinds of personal gods, and
Sure.
that I think that they use as symbolic references. If you're using a god to say there's this person and this person rules the world and is in charge of you, I don't really relate to that. But I'm fine with people saying I believe in this God. And what that does is it just that belief connects me to the consciousness that you spoke about. But the reason I don't just speak about consciousness or mindfulness is one big difference. My relationship with this force induces in me a feeling of wanting to bow, meaning I am I am in awe of the magnitude of this consciousness. So rather than saying, I'm the master of my own destiny, I got this covered,
Yes.
and there happens
Yeah.
to be consciousness out there, don't worry about it, you're not my boss. I feel what I feel is this is just like, every day I'm sort of looking at the world and thinking like what a marvelous, amazing consciousness there is. And so I think the bowing element is missing from conversations around mindfulness,
Yes.
and it's really mostly bowing in awe of the magnificent presence that we can continue to evolve into.
I
So
love
I feel like I don't object to people. My mother said something to me once about this, which I has been strongly influential. So I have all sorts of controversial things about me. Like I call myself Hindu. People are like, but you eat steak and and I'm like, well, I'm that
Of
kind of
course you do.
I'm that kind of Hindu. I eat what I eat what I want. So one of the
You
things,
embrace your contradictions, Srini, more than anybody I know. You embrace them. There is no cognitive dissonance in you. That's what it is. You know your contradictions and you laugh and you have them, and that's it.
well, because there are many other things to be tortured by. Like
Yes.
one of the forms of torture I described myself recently. Someone said something like, "Oh, how was your day?" I said, "Oh, it was great." And they were like, "Oh, you look really happy." I said, "Yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages to that. The disadvantage is that I feel like I'm a slut for life. Like I want to throw myself at all these beautiful things in the world, and I feel like you can't. You've got to moderate something. You got to figure out how your relationships work. Like, but it's just if you really, part of the reason we keep ourselves from the state of elevation is because it would be so disruptive to our relationships. So, it's torture. In my musical, there's a line in a song that
Mhm.
that is school subjects, love objects, they are all a form of torture. It's like, how do I choose amongst all these amazing things in the world? So while I am not plagued by my contradictions because they don't surprise me, I just feel
No,
like
they don't.
that that's what life is.
No,
That's
you
what
do realize most people spend their lives trying to hide their contradictions, deny their contradictions, pretend they're not there. You realize most people are suffering because they can't face their contradictory and they don't know how to deal with that ambiguity. You realize that's most people's experience.
Yeah, I mean, I see that a lot, and I don't even mind it. Like there's a stereotype that I relate to lots of different kinds of people, but there's a stereotype which in the U.S., which is a kind of straight shooting Midwestern kind of no nonsense person, and I get along really well with those people. I don't get philosophical to the extent that they feel disoriented by this ambiguous world. I can, but I think I can embrace whatever their denial is, with love, because I understand that denial is a defense and that all humans are susceptible to pain, including me, and that if you're in the presence of someone who wishes to deny something and they're friendly and they're loving and you're enjoying a meal together, it's not my business to be
Mm,
in someone else's mind, doing something. I feel like
yeah.
I we're here for a limited time on earth. To the extent that we can be around people we love and people who make us feel good, I think it's a good thing. But this is all in the service of the fact that this idea of embracing paradox is,
Yes.
I think it's why poetry is born. Poetry is born to relieve us from the fact that my experience has been, and this relates to the message I was going to say. My mother sort of shared with me.
Mm, yeah, please.
I said to her, because she would go past every house of worship and she would put her hands together, and I would say, "Mom, but that was a mosque. Like, why did you put your hands together?" She'd go past her church, she put her hands together, and I'd say, "I'm confused. I heard I was Hindu. Like, why are you putting your hands together in front of all of these different things?" She said, "Well, you can call yourself what you want to, but I'm just going to tell you one thing. If your religion separates you from other people, it's not a
Mm,
religion. And
yeah.
if your religion connects you to other people, then it's a religion." And I feel like I've lived my life with that in mind all the time.
Mm,
If there's something, if my habits or my priorities or my way of living separates me from other people, then I feel like I'm missing something. If I mean, there are people I don't like, and there are people who don't like me, but that's not to do with a set of, like some overarching philosophy or overarching religion. It's because they just don't like. They may not like this kind of openness. They may not like how I dress. They may not like the fact that I can be rebellious at times,
at
and
times.
like but I if they don't, if they get me on the wrong day, I might be hurt by that or upset by it. But in general, it doesn't surprise me that people have a variety of responses to me, because
Yes.
I have a variety of responses to the world as well. So,
I think you're provocative to people who prefer black and white and who prefer to think they know, because I think our relationship with uncertainty really determines our relationship with the quality of our life. If we can't relate to uncertainty in a playful, provocative way, we're going to experience a lot more pain. We really are going to suffer a lot more. And I think that can really challenge people, if I imagine, when they meet you, because you're only playful in the face of ambiguity and it's your preference to swim in the gray zone and to not know and to embrace that and to want more of that. That's where you become adventurous. You find knowing and certainty tedious, limiting, boring, pointless. You don't spend energy there. So I imagine people who are leaning more on the authoritarian side, who need to know, who want certainty, would find you very challenging.
yeah, I think they do. Although, I had a pretty authoritarian certain father, so I have good experience, life
Wow,
experience dealing
really?
dealing with that. Yeah, because I think that's true. It depends on the amount of time I have with that person.
Exactly.
Like,
Yes.
if I have, 5 minutes, people sometimes will
Fine.
say to me, they'll say, can you do something? Can you just do something very concrete and practical? And I'll be like, well, the brain is not very concrete or practical, and neither is human nature. And they'll say, yeah, I know, but we just need like 5 steps to do this, 3 steps to do that. And I'm like, okay, sure. I got enough of those. I have like literally like probably thousands of those.
Yeah.
I can give you those, but I don't think you'll be doing the best for people. That's fine. We'll take it. So I've over the years I've learned to tolerate that, and I try to provide caveats at the beginning to let people know that these are frameworks in how you can change your brain, and it's not really as simple as that. But I think black and white thinking is is a cause of a lot of suffering. Uh, but at the same time, there's research I think that can support some of what I'm saying. So, for example, McKinsey did a study of leaders who are in the flow, and they found that leaders who are in a flow state are 500% more productive,
Mhm.
which means that they can do 5 days of work in one day.
Yeah.
And if you're certain and and you're black and white all the time, you might think you're going through something. I had a literal real life experience about this recently. The CEO of Roulette, who's the founder, who I adore and who's also a very good friend, we had an offsite recently, and so he created this offsite to-do list with deadlines and dates and things like that. So he said, "Well, how did you like the to-do list?" I said, "Well, you know what I think about to-do lists. Like I think it's absurd, but it's funny." And he said, "No, you know why I did that?" And I said, "Well," I said, "because I know I just know what's going to happen. Like in the first week, you're going to ignore it, and then as a point of fun, you're going to go back to it and refer to it, and you're going to have three-quarters of it done." And so that's exactly what I did. I was like, I'm not even going to look at the to-do list. I know what I need to do. So I did them, and I went back, and I was like, oh, I have two more things that I have to do, and I need other people's input, and they're not here, so I'll wait for them. But I feel like a certain kind of self-trust like what I'm talking about is not something that I think I was specially endowed with. I honestly believe that all human beings have the capability for what I call existential confidence, which is the ability to be committed to a possibility that does not yet exist in reality because you are self-sufficient.
Mhm.
Not because you know everything, but because you know if you're lost, you'll say, "Hey, can you show me how to get there?" When I'm doing our machine learning paradigms, I hit a wall with the math. And so I call our machine learning experts and I say, "Can you help me figure this out in English? Like how do I think about this in a
Mm.
language that we can share?" So every human being, I believe, has this capacity for self-sufficiency. But we are raised in systems where our self evaluations are based on other people's evaluations of ourselves. So it's other people saying, good boy or good girl. It's other people saying, you got an A, that's why you're good. It's other people saying, you've got this amount of money, that's why you're a great person. But, and in the process, we just completely lose touch with our innate intelligence. And because I like hanging out at bars and because I like meeting random people, I find it amazing to speak to people of all with all kinds of education, people who have not finished high school, and to find their brilliance in a conversation. Like you can find the brilliance in a conversation, and it doesn't have to be big words. It doesn't have, but most people are pretty profound if you give them the opportunity to be profound. Otherwise, they operate from this container of, I didn't, oh, hi, this is me. I'm an electrician. I didn't finish high school. And I guess I'm not going to be able to relate to a highly educated person like you. And the moment you set that as a context, you lose the most beautiful parts of them. But if you leave the qualification gap out, if you leave the formal education parts out, if you leave the fancy clothes out, then what you have is two humans trying to make it through the world, and then you really can discover, I think, the greatness in other people. And it's both uh, when you reach a point where you don't even know whether the other person is separate from you when you're speaking to them, I think that's when there's just a lot of joy and a lot of playfulness. And even if someone said to me, "I don't like meditating," I would say, strive for that. Just strive for that kind of good time.
Yeah. You speak so naturally of everybody's innate existential learning. I don't think that's how a lot of people would think about themselves, Srini. I think that's beautiful and generous and compassionate as you are. Most people would never have thought of themselves as having that innate within them. And it's not just because they're told as they're growing up with external forces rather than an internal locus of control. I think it's more than that. I think we're so conditioned as we're raised about how to think about problems and how to think about uncertainty. We're not really raised to embrace ambiguity. And I keep talking about that. Can we just share with our viewers why is it so important to embrace ambiguity? Let's just deal with that because somebody might be listening to that going, I like being certain. Can we just scramble some of that certainty a little bit?
Sure. So, there are many systems in the brain. There is a system that's involved in like kind of certain logical strategic thinking, which is in the prefrontal cortex. And then there's another system that's involved in predictions, in possibility, in creativity, which is the default mode network. Now, in my book, I point out the fact that switching between the thank you, that's it, the switching between the prefrontal cortex and the focus and the unfocused networks is important, and being in this cognitive rhythm is important. Now so when you are in the default mode network, you've basically decided, I'm not going to just make my future in what I see. Like if you look at the world right now and you listen to the news, it's not very encouraging about building a life. So you go out of the prefrontal cortex into a world of possibility, the default mode network, where you ask not what can be from what you see, but what you can make from what you cannot see. And when you are in the possibility network, you encounter many possibilities. So one is growth mindset. And this has been shown extensively in studies that if you believe that something can be achieved with hard work, you do much better. This has happened with girls in mathematics, for example. For a long time, girls have been socialized to believing that they're not good at math. But if you take a group of girls and you tell them it's possible for you to do as well as any boy, they actually can do as well as any boy. So we're conditioned in one way if you stay in the prefrontal cortex. But when we go to the ambiguous network, the possibility network, and we say, what if maybe I can be that good? It's been shown that can be done. Also, contrary to what we think, we actually we have much more cognitive control in the default mode network. We have much more cognitive control when we are in a possibility state of mind, because we can recover from mistakes. We're not rigid, right? So we're
Yes.
in this
Yes.
ambiguous state of mind. So we're like, oh, I made a mistake. Let me come back. I made a mistake. Whereas if you're like, I know where I'm going and I know where I'm going, you just keep going, and who knows where you're going. So while I believe that in certain instances, acting in clear ways is important, we need to make a distinction between clarity and certainty, because pretty much nothing is certain in the world. Anybody could drop down dead tomorrow, but we can be clear and we can be strategic. So I don't have anything against certainty about, like, I am certain I'm going to do a presentation and I am going to be clear that I'm going to do this presentation. But I don't think I can be certain about how people are going to respond to it.
No.
And so I feel like ambiguity is really it's a source of questions. And when you allow yourself to question, you give yourself the opportunity for new insights.
Yes.
So I think switching between the certain state when it's necessary, like if someone is changing their child and the child is kicking and screaming, you're not going to be like, well, there's ambiguity. So I'm not sure. It's like, no, I got to change the diaper.
Yeah.
That's not good. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this, and that's that. So I feel like there's a place for that kind of sensibility, and it's obvious. But I think we
Yeah.
hold on to it too much.
That's it. That's it.
Kierkegaard, the philosopher, had a really beautiful description of anxiety, one of my favorites. He said, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom.
Huh.
And he said, we all say we want to be free, but actually we go out of our way to put balls and chains around us so that
Yes.
so we don't have to deal with the freedom, because freedom is like a lack of gravity. Right? It's like you can be free to do whatever you want to do in the world. Like nobody wants to deal with that degree of freedom. I see this in the most tangible ways in many wealthy people I work with who are destroying their lives. It's like when you're wealthy, you have a lot of money. When you have a lot of money, you can buy a lot of expensive wines. You can buy a lot of full cream cheeses. You can you can do whatever. You can have lots of affairs. You can do whatever you want. You can do all these things. But if you just indulge in those excesses, it's not that I judge those excesses. It's that in those people, they don't know how to deal with that freedom.
Yes.
So, as humans, I think it's very difficult to know how to deal with freedom. And ambiguity is an introduction to the world of potential freedom. But what we do is we torture ourselves about making a decision, And I actually believe this question is so important right now. I just wrote a piece with a colleague of mine, Jim Selman, which will probably publish soon, talking about the fact that I think that COVID, to a large extent, uh, it signaled, and this is an opinion, not a fact. It's signaled a critical transformation point in human evolution. And I believe that this transformation point has to do with the need to transition out of a life that was fully dependent on just logical things into a more emergent state. And I went so far as to suggest that we are evolving from Homo sapiens into Homo existo, which is to emerge, to be able to be comfortable and at peace with the ability to emerge. And there's a lot of, there are a lot of mathematical formulae, for example, that I think we could use to distantly substantiate some of these ideas. So one of them would be a theory that's called the fitness beats truth theorem.
The fitness what?
Beats truth theorem.
Yep. Go
which
ahead.
is, which is Donald Hoffman, who says that people who just are saying, no, reality is what I see, and this is what I've got, and I'm dealing with this reality as it is, actually become evolutionarily unfit. It's the people who instead choose to pay attention to what they can change who become very fit because they're moving on throughout. So there may be some
So to do that, you need to have a low ego defense.
I think so.
So we need to go back further. Yes, to what you're saying, but isn't it true to get there, you need to have dealt with the cognitive dissonance within you or the ego defense within you. So before that comes dealing with self, before you can then say, I'm going to handle ambiguity. How am I doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of ways to handle ambiguity, from more cognitive techniques to deeper psychodynamic things to spiritual things. So, if you look at a cognitive technique, uncertainty activates the conflict center in the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex. And so, when it does this, we tend to go back to what we were doing. And uncertainty distorts the truth in our brains. People who are in uncertain states, 75% of those people mispredict when bad things are going to happen.
Yeah.
Meaning you ask them, is something bad going to happen? Because it's uncertain, they say, yes, it's terrible, it's terrible. So just using a simple form of self-talk, which is, when I'm uncertain, I cannot trust my assessment of the future.
Love it. Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I cannot trust myself. Something bad might happen, something good might happen, but I am not going to trust the next step, which is my brain saying to me, the sky is going to fall down. I don't know where to go. So you can do that just at a very cognitive level. You can use self-talk to just rewire your brain. Or if you take it all the way to the spiritual side and you start thinking of spiritual leaders like Ramana Maharishi, whose teaching was, in order to navigate this world, all you ask is, who am I? And the metaphor for this is that in his meditations and contemplations, he said he had discovered that he is not his body, he is not his mind, he is not his emotions, that
I love it.
consciousness is the screen,
Yeah.
and what we have to come to do is to know the screen upon which life is projected. So all these ambiguous thoughts, all these uncertainties, these are just mental processes that are like characters in a movie projected onto the screen. And we get so engaged with this ambiguity that we forget that we must find consciousness, which is the screen upon which these things are projected. And of course, it's hard to do that. But you know where you see this in action is you see it in the eyes of expert sports people. If you watch someone in American football, Tom Brady is a hero. When he throws a pass, it's like he's in a different world. Or you look at great tennis players. When they're playing, they're completely in the zone. If you look at Roger Federer, when he's hitting a ball, his eye is completely on the ball all the time. And so when you are in that zone, you are letting consciousness do your work for you. Because you've done the practice, your brain knows, your consciousness, I think, can fuel practice. But practice on its own is almost never sufficient. There was
Yes.
some work done on deliberate practice, and it was surprising work. It was by McNamara, I think she was at Princeton, who looked at what percentage of the success pie does practice contribute to? Because you talk to any expert sports person, they're like, oh, it's because I work so hard. Any pianist, because I work so hard. Any student, because I work so hard. Well, it turns out that practice, the most it accounts for is about 25% of the success
Wow.
pie. That's for musicians and sports people. When it comes to work and day-to-day activity, it goes down to 4% and less than 1%.
Wow.
And yet we hear that 10,000
What
hours
was
is what.
this study, Srini? What was this study? I'd love to read it.
I'd be happy to send you a link on it. It's in
Yeah, thank you.
deliberate practice, and the first author is McNamara.
Thank
I
you.
think, I think it's Brooke McNamara at Princeton. So it's pretty interesting because what people don't realize is that when we talk to experts, they're not in touch with their unconscious. So they're not going to tell you the unconscious processes that led to their success. All they remember is that they practiced hard. So they say, well, I'm so glad all that practice really, was for good. Except that we don't talk about the 99% of people who really did practice and didn't get there.
Yes.
These are the people sitting at home saying, I practiced, I
Yes.
worked hard, but I never got there. So what did I do wrong? My practice wrong? It's like, no, your practice is not the only thing. Practice, I think, in when it is fueled by the kind of consciousness awareness that we're talking about, is is when it can elevate you. But on its own, it's not going to. And I actually think we have to reconstruct ourselves
I love
pretty
it.
much all the time. Like Novak Djokovic, you can tell I love tennis. Novak Djokovic,
You love
when he
everything, Srini.
went through a lot of things,
You do.
but Novak Djokovic, when he talked about, he'd been wanting to win the French Open, and then he said, when he got it, he just realized, because he had been dominating the world of tennis, winning everything, and he said, I realized I couldn't keep being who I was. I actually had to re-examine myself, in some ways reconstruct what I was choosing for my diet, my life. I had to be a new person to keep on winning. In business, we call this crisis at the summit. And what it is a lot of people who are successful, they do well, 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 and then they suddenly are at a plateau. And when they're at this plateau, they don't know what to do. They press on the gas and they don't go anywhere. And Dabrowski, who is a Polish psychiatrist and psychologist, actually talked about the fact that the thing to do there, talk about ambiguity, is positively disintegrate. So when they studied gifted students, they found that gifted students are constantly falling apart to put themselves together at a higher level.
Yes, 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 yes. That's it. That's it. I want to relate to this in a way that to me is very real world. I'd love your feedback on this, Sprinny. And I don't think I've spoken with you about this before. When I'm on stage and I begin to do an intervention with one person in the audience, I begin cognitively. You said the first step, you can do it cognitively. And it's, I know the question, I know how to build rapport, I understand the calibration, and I'm ticking the boxes.
Right.
Then it all disappears. And I'm just left with blank. And I love it because the moment I go into that void where there's nothingness, I disappear, the room disappears. Any idea of what to do next is gone. I have no indication, not even inkling of what I should say or do next. That is my most precious space to go into because now I know I'm in consciousness and all the things, perceptions, ideas, expectations, certainties, what I want to see happen, how I need to look good goes. And all I have left is this blank. And I just wait. And Srini, it just drops into me. Just the next whatever is there. And it's so effortless. There is no me there trying to get it right. Right and wrong is gone. It's so far in the background. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, because I think you're switching from the conscious brain, which is fairly limited, to
Yes,
the vast magnitude of intelligence you have in your unconscious brain, right? And if you're going to try to control everything all the time, you're basically banishing the majority of your brain that could help you.
that's it.
So if you can find some way to say, I'm I'm not just going to work with the patterns that I've known. I'm going to see you and the situation for the
Yes,
unique situation that it is.
yes,
You know,
yes,
Campbell and colleagues in Harvard Business Review did a study on why good leaders make bad decisions. And there are two reasons. One is emotional tagging. They make assumptions that if a certain kind of thing happened in the past, it's going to happen again. And pattern recognition, that not just the emotions are going to be the same, but the pattern is going to be the same. And what you're telling me is that you don't do that. What you do is you don't let your memory of even if the person seems like someone you knew, you
yes.
just you drop it and you say, guess what?
Gone,
I'm
gone.
making a place for you inside of me where you will be as fully represented as you can be, so I can respond to you as fully as I can, not with the memory of who you could be.
Yes,
And I think it's a really powerful way to interact, and it's what we were talking about faith. It, it,
yes.
faith is fundamentally
That's
a
what I was
way.
asking you when you say, what do you mean by faith? Because that's my relationship with what you call faith. I call it trusting my unconsciousness. I just
Yeah.
have trust that this integration, when it's needed, it's there.
Well, I also think you're opening the channel of connection. So it's not even just your own consciousness, it's the consciousness that moves through you that declares the connection with the other person, right? Because so studies have shown, if you look at these are preliminary studies, but they've shown that I think that in this one study, Grau, Grau is the first author of the study. They found that if you take a few people in France and a few people in India, and you have them dial in through the internet, and they cannot see each other, and I can't remember which country was which, but if you have them think the words, Spanish words like hola, like so I'm just thinking hola in my head, the person in the other country can predict what that is because the electricity in your brain can be transferred through the internet across long distances. So what that means is that I
Wow.
think what technology does is technology allows for us to see the connections that already exist. So this
Yes.
this visual platform is allowing for us. Like I could not see you if I was not already connected to you. But the fact that I am, and now we have a device that is sort of allowing us to be in this literal same frequency visually and auditorily, what it means is that our connection is always there. So when you drop those thoughts, not only are you creating a place for that person in your brain, but you are acknowledging the connection and then operating in the space of that connection. And I think so often we keep ourselves from that. I mean, I always tell people it's kind of amazing, but we literally live in one another's brain tissue. Like right now, you might be on the screen in front of me, and you might be somewhere in Australia, but you are a part of my visual cortex. Like you have
Yes, I
become
am.
an electrical activation in my brain. So you are in my body, and in
And
your
I
body.
only exist to you in your brain.
That's right.
But we
Yeah,
all tell ourselves you exist there, but you don't exist there. To me, you only
oh,
exist in my brain. I
that's
love
right.
this.
Yeah. And so that means that the moment I see you, I am part of you. And the moment you see me, you are literally part of me. When I work with CEOs sometimes and they'll say, well, what do you think about this new hire? Should I hire them? I said, well, do you want them to live in your brain? It's simple as that. If you want people to live in your brain, keep them around you. If you don't want them to live in your brain, stay away from them. Because whatever toxicity you have going on outside of you in your life is going to be toxic to your neurons. Those people will be constantly there. I'm unhappy. I'm unhappy. I don't like this. I am angry. It's like nothing wrong with that. No judgment about it. But if you don't want to have that in your brain, then put yourself in a situation where the people who are living in your brain are the people you want to be living in your brain.
This is okay, Srini.
The things we put out are the things we get back. So if you are putting out negative things, you start to feel this. I once got in, people always laugh at me because I'm very particular about what I want to eat. And it
You
changes,
are.
my mind changes all the time. So one of the worst things that, well, it's a funny thing to watch is me at a three-star French Michelin restaurant because it's because French waiters are very certain generally about what they serve and how they serve it. And if I'm at a restaurant like that, you know, if I'm hungry, I want to eat something. So I'll say, can I have that? And can I have a side of chilies? Now, that's like anathema, right? Everyone's like,
It is.
oh my God, do you lack the class not to know? And I'm like, uh, I've eaten at these restaurants a lot, but I just feel like eating that right now. And, especially if you're on a busy travel schedule and you're going around and you're not eating what you want to eat. And so I got into this situation once at a restaurant like this, and I said this to the waiter, and he said, "Well, if you wanted food like that, you could have gone to the Thai restaurant down the street."
Wow.
And I said, "No, what I really wanted was French food cooked by this chef with green chilies on the side." And so he said, "Well, we do not do that. It's not part of our culture." So I said, "Let me tell you a little bit about your culture because you obviously are not aware of this. I mean, are you aware of piment d'Espelette?" And so he goes, I said, this is Espelette pepper is part of French cooking, and there are varieties of taste that may be alien to your mind because maybe you only worked in this restaurant. So I can tell he's getting, particularly angry with me. And he goes, I said, but please just ask the chef. So, he comes back and he goes, yeah, chef says that's fine. We'll do it. I said, can we just stop you this for a second? Because we are having a disagreement at dinner and I work very hard. I want the rest of my evening to be great. And I don't want to not love you. Like, I really don't. Like, I want to keep speaking to you so that we can have a disagreement about the flavors that should be associated with French food because I fully respect there's nothing wrong with having a purist view. Like your view is as legitimate as mine, but we just don't have agreement. For the rest of this evening, can we just like try to figure out how to love each other? Because I want to love you and I'm gonna have a great experience and I want you to have a great experience. And it was really he didn't know what to do initially, and then he came
Oh, it's
back like
beautiful.
started laughing, and I was like, yeah, I'm not just like the person who's sitting here trying to be entitled about the food that I want. I'm just telling you what I want to eat.
Yeah.
And I know where you're coming from. I know that I'm changing. Like you want me to have a certain taste, and I'm not in the mood for that taste right now. Like I want to have another kind of taste. And by the end of the evening, we were on really good terms. And it was a really interesting moment for me to recognize that it's not hierarchical, right? It's a relationship. Like you're going there, someone is saying, "I'm bringing you some food." You're eating the food. I could have left and said, "Well, that's too bad." Who is he to tell me what you? It's not what I'm feeling. I'm just feeling like I want to eat this. You're disagreeing with me. I'm tired. I just want to eat what I want to eat, and I understand you have a different opinion. So I feel that so often we we stay away from because in my head I was now that I'm thinking about it, I thought of it as an example because I'm like I probably didn't want an angry waiter living in my head. Like I
Yes.
probably wanted a happy waiter living in my head so I could have a pleasant evening for the rest of the evening. And so often people will not say what they want because they don't want to upset the waiter, but then they
Yes.
but then they have their own anxiety about this. Like, but can I eat this? But what's in this food? But how do I know? So
So
it's
I'm
not
going
a
to take that a step further. You said just before this story, which I love, that you declare to the waiter, I want to love you. How do we make it so we love each other? That is so Srini. I just love it. Every time I connect with you, I just am reminded of a higher level that we can bring to our lives. And I just honor you for it, Srini. And I trust you receive that honor from people wherever you go because it is so beautiful and profound. There was something you said earlier, and I don't know if I agree yet, so I'd love your thoughts. You said something like, and I'm going to misquote you, that we put out into the world what we get back. I think if I come across an angry driver, I didn't put that in the world. I just think I came across an angry freaking driver. I
right.
don't think I'm going to take on responsibility for his bad mood. So I
No.
just want to pick up on that sentence and let's just break that down a little bit because I do make poor hiring decisions sometimes. Speaking of leadership, because I understand that's a lot of your specialty. And it's not that I put that out there. I didn't know they were going to be grumpy, not have no
Oh,
ability to take feedback.
yeah.
I didn't invite that in my head, but now it's my problem. So can you break that down a little bit and how you look at that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about something about this recently, because I think from if I put myself in your shoes and think about the mistakes I make over and over again, because there are many, it's because there's some kind of circuit, some kind of habit circuit that operates outside of my conscious awareness, where somehow the data that comes together, I don't see that I'm doing this. I think I'm doing something completely different. I'm
Mm,
hiring a completely different kind of person, but there's
yeah.
still a habit and a compulsion that we.
Mm,
And so the first thing I would say is there's the conscious brain and there's the unconscious brain. And
yeah.
so consciously, you feel like you're hiring a nice, pleasant person. You don't know what's happening. Unconsciously, there is there is this question that I would raise. I don't think this is certain by any means, but the question would be when we put ourselves in these situations, what is getting enacted? What kind of familiar thing, even if it's unpleasant, are we associating to?
Mm,
And
yeah.
and that familiar thing is so. For example, um, consciously you want to hire someone who's good and who's effective and who is able to receive feedback and be self-motivated. Unconsciously, there may be a practice in you that is like I need to figure out how to correct this when I make this. That may be the dominant goal.
Yeah.
That like so for me
But
that
why?
example.
But hang on. It's really disappointing. I don't realize that till after.
I mean that's true for all of us. Like
It
because
is.
it is disappointing. I mean it's a I and it's not really obvious what to do. I think the work is much deeper. I
Yes,
like for
I think
example,
so.
I find for certain things they always get like more complicated than I want them to be. Administrative things, uh,
Yes.
like
Look at your
visa,
face.
like yeah, mortgages,
You're
like
screwing
well,
up your face.
well, it's
Tax time.
yeah, well, it's terrible, like those things, and I always feel like that it's got very little to do with that thing. It's some kind of relationship that I have with with administration that's perverse. If you take it down to its roots, one level would be my profound unresolved issues with authority. Right?
Yes.
That that when there are these authoritative moments, I think I'm doing something, but actually there's some historical moment where this habit of being unresolved with authority shows up again. And I think I really have to, and that's still an active issue for me. I think I still have to figure out what is that because it's not as simple as I need to undo that so I can lead a better life. I think one of the complications of human existence is we have annihilation anxieties. This is sort of from old time Freud. Sort of, we have fear of being fragmented, fear of coming apart, fear of being dominated, that go hand in hand with the need to surrender and the need to be egoless and be fragmented and the need for someone else to take charge.
Yeah.
Those things exist at the same time. So if
Mm,
you are unresolved about your own sense of agency, if you are unresolved because on the surface you say, I don't want anyone to control me, but there's a part of you that feels like, oh man, I'd love for somebody else to do this. If
yes.
if you have those two things going on all the time, your poor brain's gonna be like, can you give me a proper instruction, please? Like, what do you
Mm,
want? Do you want? And that's when we get into these complications. So
mm.
I think the deeper work can be revealing, but more recently I have felt that the work should probably be beyond the narrative. The narrative,
I
even the
agree. I
Even the
agree.
psychological narrative is just, you can go into it and you can get some kind of resolution, but it's not until you operate from realization, consciousness,
I
bliss,
agree.
that you can really overcome that. So I don't know that I want to grapple with my annihilation anxieties through narrative. I want to recognize I want to
What are
recognize
you
that.
doing today, Srini? I'm grappling with my
Right,
annihilation anxiety.
right.
What are you
I want
doing?
to, yeah, it's just like I live my whole life to be in the zone. Like I love being in the zone,
Yeah.
with or without a martini. I just think it's a great place. I don't mistake I don't mistake my transcendent moments with my recreational moments. My
Yes.
recreational moments, I take advantage of the recreational insights. But I feel Thomas Hubel, who's a spiritual teacher in Israel, said this very beautifully. He said, "There's nothing wrong with changing consciousness recreationally, but it's important to remember that if that is your practice, that you are constantly stealing from consciousness.
Yes.
And it's
So
not
let's
like,
talk about that because I think what you said, I am on the same path. Why I relate to your path would be more accurate in that the narrative process is part of it and it's fun and it's dramatic and we can get lots out of it and it's a fun way to connect. Well,
right,
if it's not that, let's talk about what it is because to me it's about consciousness. It's going to the no mind place where we realize and recognize my thoughts are not me, my mind is not me, my body is not me. Then if none of that is me, then who is me? And that observer, I'm finding a lot more peace and a lot more pathway through becoming the observer and the practice of
yeah,
expanding on being an observer than I am in trying to analyze all my thoughts.
yes,
So, and I think, is that what you meant when you said, I don't think it's the narrative process? Is that what
yeah,
you meant instead?
yeah. I think we are the perceiver of our perceptions.
Yes.
And to get to know the perceiver is to know that the perceiver is always connected to the perception. It's like desire and its fulfillments. The reason desire causes so much chaos is because it's always creating a world of duality. I want that. I am separate from that. Whereas high achievers, when they get what they want, they've already imagined that goal in their heads and they're not separate from it. They are living their lives as that. And in this non dual state, I think we can come to know what we're calling the perceiver and the perceived as one. And I think when we know the perceiver and the perceived as one, we'll come to know the nature of consciousness. I mean, I have glimpses of this in my meditation practice. I
Mm.
feel like there are moments like I have these orchids that are growing at home, and I'm always amazed at the budding, and then I watch them open slowly, and I literally get excited the evening before. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna come in the morning, this orchid's gonna be open. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
what is making this happen? Like you could be like, well, it's the nutrients, and it's like, well, what's making the nutrients make this happen? Like, what
Yes.
is, and that's when I talk about God, not as a figurehead that's making it happen, but the consciousness that is beyond my perception, that is determining what is making things happen. Francis Collins, who is the head of the National Institute of Health in the US and was the head of the Human Genome Project, wrote a book on why it is statistically implausible that God does not exist. And he had a kind of biological mathematical argument that it's not possible that these things occur by chance. That the likelihood that there is an undetermined factor, whether we call that consciousness or God or spirit or the unknown that we have yet to discover, that there is a force behind life that is not easy to articulate. And I think if anyone's lost and thinking, when am I going to find that force? Or I don't even know what he's talking about. Like, what is that force? That's a good reason to stay alive, is to get to know that force, because there is a bliss in that consciousness that is so different from earthly joy. I love earthly joy, as you know, but I just think that bliss is amazing. And it's the more we can invite that into our lives, the way you do when you're speaking, when you're speaking to someone in the audience, and you are in that relatively egoless state, there is a kind of a bliss almost in the anticipation that what
Yes.
will arrive.
What
And
will what will just emerge?
right.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's incredible. It's like that opening
It
orchid.
is.
Like it's going to happen.
Yes. And I
It's
just
going,
trust it completely. There is nothing I need to bring. It just
yeah.
appears.
No, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful, I think it's a reason to be alive.
You talked in your book, I believe it was in your book I read last night, about a spiritual teacher who did an entire sermon studying a flower, and only one other monk began to smile because they recognized finally what the sermon was, which was just to be present to what is fully and completely. So can we talk a little bit about your book, which I just love, Srini? Um, I mean this is the deepest compliment. I found no surprises in this book because this is such a perfect reflection of your mind and how you play with life and play with thoughts and play with who you are and who you becoming aware of. Would you like to speak a little bit to this book? Is that okay if you can share a little bit about what you're wanting to achieve with Thinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try by Dr. Srini Pillay, which I've just loved?
Thank you. Yeah. No, so that book actually came about because my agent said to me, just speak to me for 1 hour and tell me what you're doing. And I told her everything I was doing, and she goes, okay, it sounds humanly impossible. Would you be willing to talk about how you're achieving this in through the lens of human biology? And
Yes.
and I said, yeah, sure. She said, because that would be the best way to think about the next book, like something that you can share personally through the lens of biology would be a great way to think about this. So the book is basically about the fact that in our brains we have focus circuits and unfocused circuits. That the focus circuits are very important in executing ideas, but that to
Yes.
source ideas, we need to go into the unfocused brain. And
Yes.
to source ideas, there are people like Einstein who said his discovery was a musical perception. Steve Jobs has said you can't join the dots moving forward because you just don't know what's going to happen. You can join them looking backward, but to
Yes.
go forward, in Jobs' words, he said you have to have gut, karma, life, destiny, whatever. And I call that the default mode network. And I say that there are ways you can learn to tap into the default mode network so that you can invite these insights more readily and give examples from life. Carrie Banks Mullis, who discovered a way of making synthetic DNA, his lab mates hated him. They just said, this guy's not a real scientist. He doesn't go sequentially. When did he discover this? He was driving from Berkeley to Mendocino. He was with his girlfriend. They had had a little bit of wine. She fell asleep in the car. He was on his way to his little cabin, stopped in the middle, started scribbling on a rock face, took that information with him, went back to the cabin,
Wow.
and this occurred to him. So, like how we all have our best ideas in the shower, there are very particular practices that we can incorporate into our lives to build unfocus into our days, to be
Yeah.
able to allow ourselves to have the full potential of who we are. I tell the example, I think even in the book, I think I told this example of going to Harvard and thinking, I really needed to prove myself. So the first quarter of my training, I went to everything. I left the units really late. I went to 100% of my didactics, and my review at the end of the first quarter, I thought, I definitely I nailed this. Like this is going to be good. So I go to it, and they say, well, clearly you know more information than anyone in your class. We can tell that from the didactics, but we're very worried about you. And I said, well, what are you worried about? They said, well, we don't see you sitting in the park benches talking to your friends. We don't see
Wow.
you going to Walden Pond for a swim. We go to 100% of didactics. It shows no discernment. Like we're not here to train robots. You could go anywhere else. We want to nurture your intelligence. That's why
What
we.
wonderful mentors.
It was incredible. And they said,
Oh,
we want to see you. We have every faith in the fact that you're going to more than meet the requirements for the concrete focused work. We want to see you develop your intelligence by giving yourself a chance to be able to be at a higher level. And you're not going to do that if you don't take these breaks. So that book is about that. It's about the fact that we get so into this kind of focus fatigue life that we forget that our brains need refueling during the day. Focus, unfocus, focus, unfocus. So we can, you're not going to drive a long distance without refueling your car. Why would you not refuel your brain every day, several times?
Mm,
And
mm,
so that book is about how to refuel your brain. And
mm.
I hope is that people who read it have an aha moment where they say, wait a minute, I am robbing myself of my greatest intelligence. And because I'm making excuses for why I can't take time off to give myself a chance.
Mm. One of the things I loved about the book was your relationship with learning. And you speak, it's page 81 for anybody who gets the book, which I do recommend. It's available on Amazon, isn't it, Srini?
It
I
is,
think
yes.
that's where my husband got it for me as a gift. And it's about removing resistance. You have a number of steps in the book. Can you explain what you mean by removing resistance so that we become more effective at learning and more open to the learning process?
So I'm not sure if you're referring to this, but I think was it the spring coil approach in which I
Let me
talked
go to
about?
page 81. I've got this. I'm glad I wrote the page number. So it's the precursor. It says one of these might get overstretched. Asking these questions will put the spring back into every
Yeah,
step. It's the
so
bounce back.
it
And
is the
there's
spring.
fight the feedback. But number 2 is remove resistance, which I love. And number
Yeah.
3 was using your predictive power, which I think could be overused. But go ahead.
So yes, so it's a spring coil method. It's based on computational neuroscience. And there was a model that people looked at computationally to ask the question of what slows the brain down and what makes you not agile. And very often, we don't realize that we put things into our lives or things have come into our lives that really slow us down. So there might be a person who's always saying no, but you keep on going back to them. There might be some person in your life who's always somehow dragging you down. And all of a sudden, we don't realize that we have these resistances and we want to remove them. But the moment we start to realize that this is the thing that's slowing me down, we can begin to remove that from our lives. A great example of this is Lady Gaga, who actually talked about the fact that she reached a point in her career where she didn't want to sing anymore. And everyone said, what do you mean didn't want to sing anymore? And she said, I just didn't want to sing anymore because I was doing things I didn't want to do. I was taking selfies and selling perfumes, and I knew I had more to offer the world than that. Like, I'm a talented singer. I want to sing. And so I did one little, and I did one little thing. I started to say no. And when I started to say no, I went home and I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, you, I can sleep with because you've got integrity. You are representing yourself. Otherwise, I can't go to sleep with myself saying yes to stuff that I just don't mean. So, impedance control is part of the 5-step process in which you can allow your brain to become agile. And one way you can begin to implement this is ask yourself, is there something I can say no to and say no to it today? Something
I
as
love
simple as
that.
the
It is.
procrastination exercise, right?
Yeah. To me, reducing resistance in the learning process again is becoming less ego defensive. It's about noticing my resistance to not knowing and being
Yeah.
open to not knowing. My relationship with not knowing gets healthier every year. What's your relationship? How would you help someone approach becoming more comfortable and open to not knowing?
I would say number one, use self-talk. So remember that not knowing is going to make your brain feel like something bad's going to happen, but
Yes.
but it's okay. Number two, reflect on the fact that people who already know everything have nothing to discover. Not knowing is the path to discovery. And so I
Yes.
think if you allow yourself to not know, it's the path to discovery. And then I think the third thing is developing existential confidence. Remember that nothing great was built because it already existed.
Yeah.
All great things came from the imagination. Trust your imagination, be in your imagination, spend time in your imagination, get to know the things that your brain can create. And then ask yourself, when you're there, how do I build this? So I think it's critical to live in a field of possibility in order
Yes.
to build anything that expresses your greatest virtue. When Aristotle was somebody who said that our highest goal in life is to be able to express our virtues. I actually showed a video recently of Hugh Jackman talking about God and talking about God and God's presence in the way we're talking about it. And someone said to me afterwards, "Oh man, that guy is just like he's in bliss, like so often you can see it. Like how does he spend his time there?" I said, "Because he's spending a lot of his life expressing his greatest virtues, his ability to dance, his ability to act. Are we doing that? Are we
Yes.
expressing our greatest virtues? And if not, can we add one activity to our lives
I
that
love
allows us
that.
to do
I love that. There's a lot in the book we haven't discussed yet. I do recommend people get this book. One of the messages you talk early in the book is about how to unfocus, which is you have 6 or 7. Can we just speak about mind wandering? Because you're a neuroscientist who advocates mind wandering. It's so contradictory. I love it. Speak a little bit about that if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So, mind wandering has been associated with negative affect and anxiety and distraction and procrastination. But there's a form of mind wandering called positive constructive daydreaming that can be really helpful. Jerome Singer studied this in the 1950s, and it's basically three things. Set aside 20 minutes of your day, do something low key. So don't just sit at your desk and let your mind float away. You should be gardening or knitting or walking. And then imagine something positive or wishful, like running through the woods with your dogs or lying in the sun on the beach. And let your mind go in that way while you're doing this. And when you do this, it improves your creativity. It takes your mind out of this focus brain and rejuvenates that brain. So when you do come back to focusing, you
Yes.
can have the energy that you need.
So, for
Sorry.
anybody who hasn't yet, I do recommend the book Thinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try by Srini Pillay. You're phenomenal. I'm so in love with your brain and how you think and how you approach life. I have the biggest love affair in my mind about how you think. You inspire me all the time. So, I'm so grateful that you're in my life.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I feel very much the same about you. As you were interviewing me, I was tempted to start interviewing you because I can feel the magnificence that's going on in your brain. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to achieve this. Maybe we can have another conversation. And
Yeah, I'd like that. And we just open it up and make it two-way, which is what we do when
yeah,
we're having a drink together. And
yeah,
we
I would
just
love.
have those ideas because I feel such a synergy with the way you think and I admire what you're doing. And I haven't recorded my introduction with you yet, but I'm going to do you justice and brag about you a little bit, Srini. So you just because there's a lot that you've done that we didn't even touch on in this conversation that you do. It's phenomenal, your life. I so admire you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. And I love the energy that's brought us together. I can sense
Yeah,
it's not
I'm
just
so
rational.
grateful.